Surround us, Lord. Surround us, O Lord. We need to be in your presence. Surround us, Lord. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, O Lord. We need to be in your presence. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, O Lord. We need to be in your presence. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, Lord. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know there's days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace.
All right, welcome back everyone. Today we come to Psalm 21. I suspect it may have a rather short psalm lesson today. This one is rather straightforward. Hopefully you'll forgive me a bit, especially since the next two are likely to be heavyweights. Psalm 22 in particular. So we're a bit brief today. I'm sure we'll make up for it with 22 and 23. Now, the big thing to note about Psalm 21 is that it seems rather obviously to be a companion psalm to Psalm 20, which we looked at last time. So in Psalm 20, you have the king making a request for victory, and then Psalm 21 is thanksgiving for deliverance and victory. So, in Psalm 20, you have the king beseeching God for his help, and then in Psalm 21, thanking God for his help. And you might note in particular 20 verse 4 and 21 1 and 2 for this distinction, and you can really see pretty clearly how they go together. It's also worth noting, and I think this kind of stands out as we're reading it, especially in the first 6 verses. I would say particularly 5 and 6, but it runs throughout the psalm really. Some overtones of messianic thought, messianic prophecy. Because they're, for example, verse 4. The king being granted life, length of days forever and ever, right? Certainly something that did not apply to David, to whom this psalm is attributed, as we've noted, like most of the psalms toward the beginning of the book. But you have that type of a statement, which could, be, I guess, a bit of hyperbole regarding the king. So you don't necessarily have to read it in a messianic sense, but I think the thought is certainly there, and you certainly can read it that way. And it's worth noting that the very next psalm, Psalm 22, is one of the most definitely messianic psalms in the entire book. So again, a little bit of a hint of that here in Psalm 21. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we're going through it. So we've got 3 major divisions here with this one. And they're rather obvious. As you're going through, I think this one kind of naturally shakes out into these 3 pieces. Not all equal in size, but in terms of the overall train of thought through the psalm. In the first 7 verses, you have thanksgiving for success, right? Thanksgiving on the part of the king. So if it's written by David, the king is referred to here in the third person, but that's not entirely uncommon. He did. Especially in a royal sense. I'm sure you've probably heard of the royal we, right, in the second person. Kings, royalty, queens in our own time are famous for doing that. We are not amused, right, when the queen is not happy with something. So not terribly uncommon, even though David is attributed with authorship for the psalm. No reason to dispute that, to have a problem with it that I can see. The fact that the king is referred to in the third person is not problematic and not terribly uncommon either. So thanksgiving for success on the king's part. Joy for this success, verses 1 and 2. Verses 3 through 6, some reasons, and then an explanation in verse 7 for why this is. Verses 8 through 12, we find assurances that all the enemies of God will be overcome. And there's some rather overt imprecatory thoughts in that particular section. We talked before about the idea of imprecatory psalms. So the overall psalm here, certainly not that. But you get a little bit of that hint, that flavor in verses 8 through 12. Sometimes rather graphic language regarding the destruction of God's enemies or of the psalmist's enemies, beseeching God for that. And then verse 13, he concludes with a doxology, which is a brief, usually pretty formulaic statement of praise or glorification to God. The Greek word for glory is doxa. The Greek word for word is logos. So a doxology is words of praise or words that extol the glory of someone or something. All right, so the first 7 verses. Thanksgiving for success. David writes, the king shall joy in thy strength, O Lord, and in thy salvation, how greatly shall he rejoice. Again, note the use of the third person. The psalmist referring to himself, if it is indeed David. Thou hast given him his heart's desire, and hast not withholden the request of his lips. Again, what is the request? We'll go back and see Psalm 20. Right, it's a request for deliverance from his enemies, or victory over his enemies. For thou preventest him with the blessings of goodness, thou settest a crown of pure gold on his head. He asked life of thee, and thou gavest it him, even length of days forever and ever. I noted just a moment ago, we'll highlight it again here as we're kind of making our way through. Verse 4 in particular, again, that bit of a messianic hint, because of course David did not live forever and ever. You might even think of the discourse that Peter gives in Acts chapter 2, right? And, David's sepulcher still being there, still being present in his own day. Clearly, Peter's point is, these Old Testament messianic statements and prophecy, talking about this great king to come, a king who truly is eternal, who does actually live and reign indefinitely. And of course, making the point that not true of David, because David's sepulcher was still there in Jerusalem. So again, it could be the case. It could be the case that he's using a bit of hyperbolic language, a bit of figurative language to really play up the fact that because he's been victorious, because God has provided this victory for him, this victory that he requested, he's going to have a really long reign, and it seems as if it's never going to end. That's possible, but again, I can't help but be struck, like Brother Waycaster, by that hint of a messianic thought. This king who's going to have a crown of pure gold, who's going to be granted life of God, and who's days and length of days forever and ever. Make of it what you will, but I think you can't help but see a bit of that there. His glory is great in thy salvation, honor and majesty hast thou laid upon him. For thou hast made him most blessed forever, thou hast made him exceeding glad with thy countenance. Yet again, just like 3 and 4 before it, read that how you will. Messianic hint, messianic prophecy, possibly. Figurative language, hyperbole regarding David and his reign, also possible. But note, after giving these reasons, after giving this praise, this thanksgiving to God for the victory that he requested and has now received, verse 7, he writes, "For the king trusteth in the Lord." Why is it, right? This great victory that he's been given, his reign is going to continue. We have all of these superlative remarks being made about his kingship, his majesty, this reign that's going to continue. Why did God grant this? For the king trusteth in the Lord, and through the mercy of the Most High he shall not be moved. Yet again, as we've seen in other Psalms up to this point, and we'll continue to see over and over and over again, the key theme is that David understands where his strength and where his victory comes from. And you can't help but keep in mind, this is the same David who slew Goliath with the sling and stone, despite his small stature, despite his grossly inferior weapon in hand. He was able to defeat this giant warrior that no one else in the Israelite army could, for the very same reason that we find here in 21:7. The king trusteth in the Lord, and through the mercy of the Most High he shall not be moved. David understood it as a young man fighting Goliath, and even now, I don't know at what time this psalm is being composed in David's life. There's nothing in the psalm to indicate the occasion for it, and the superscript for 20 and 21. Neither of them, give any traditional, sometimes it'll say, David when he was fleeing from Saul, or, David when he fled from Absalom. There's nothing here to indicate it. But clearly, it's at some later point in his life. He's already king. He's dealing with problems, specifically which ones we don't know. But he's in some situation where the Lord has given him this deliverance, given him this victory. And I guess all I'm trying to point out is it's the same thing. Evidently, the kingship has not gone to his head too much, because he still understands this. It's his trust in the Lord and God's strength that has given him this victory. Verses 8 through 12 shifts gears a bit, again, rather obviously. And again, there's a natural conclusion there. In verse 7, he kind of sums up this section of thanksgiving and praise with the reason for it all. It's God's doing, not his. Verses 8 through 12, note the bit of an imprecatory bent to this, particularly verses 9 and 10. You can't miss it. It says, "Thine hand shall find out all thine enemies; thy right hand shall find out those that hate thee." Oftentimes in Scripture, when you find right hand mentioned specifically, it often carries with it the idea of authority, of power, of judgment. Thy right hand shall find out those that hate thee. Right? There's nowhere they can hide. Just as God has dealt with David's enemies that gave occasion for the psalm whenever it happened, David is confident that God is going to continue providing deliverance. Thou shalt make them as a fiery oven in the time of thine anger. Can't help but think there about Daniel and company in this furnace that was heated by Nebuchadnezzar so many times over above its normal operating temperature that even the men who brought them to it to cast them in were killed by it. It was so hot. Thou shalt make them as a fiery oven in the time of thine anger. And the Lord shall swallow them up in his wrath, and the fire shall devour them. Again, kind of hard to miss. Their fruit shalt thou destroy from the earth. Speaking of their children, obviously. You may think of the conquest of the Promised Land, in which the Israelites were commanded to destroy the native people that were in the land, the Canaanites, entirely. All of them. Why? And it's rather obvious why, because as you go through the rest of the history, they failed to do that in every case, and it ultimately came back to haunt them. Their fruit shalt thou destroy from the earth, and their seed from among the children of men. Right? In other words, God is going to wipe out these people entirely. They won't even have their progeny to remember them or to carry on for them once they're gone. They will be utterly eradicated. And it's kind of worth noting in 10, I don't know exactly how many examples there are of it, but this is one of many, 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 many. Seed, singular, referring to all of their children, right? It's a singular form of a word that's very obviously intended to be understood in the plural. Again, part of the reason is we're going through Galatians. In Galatians 3, Paul makes the argument regarding the seed promise made to Abraham. He says, well, it's one seed, not many seeds. Take Paul at his word, but it's not at all uncommon for the singular form of seed to be understood to mean multiple people, multiple children. Their seed from among the children of men. Why? You may say, well, this doesn't sound right. This sounds absolutely horrible. Is there any good reason for doing this? Verse 11, for they intended evil against thee. They imagined a mischievous device which they are not able to perform. Right? There's definitely a good reason why God would do this. Why he would destroy his enemies. It's so often the case when we think of God. You think of love, kindness, compassion, mercy, rightly so. And God is also just, however, and sometimes that can be an uncomfortable thing. Verse 12, therefore shalt thou make them turn their back, when thou shalt make ready thine arrows upon thy strings against the face of them. right? He's going to cause them to, when they recognize that this fate is coming upon them, they can see it coming. They can see the Lord's wrath, and they're going to try to flee from it. In verse 13, wrapping up the psalm again, just one verse, but it kind of stands alone. It's a very fitting conclusion. Be thou exalted, Lord, in thine own strength. So will we sing and praise thy power. Okay, so that's Psalm 21. Again, in a nutshell, the big thing about it, it fits with Psalm 20. Psalm 20 and Psalm 21 go hand in hand. They have similar language, similar imagery, and it's very clear you have a request in 20 and an answer in 21. And again, those sections, as we highlighted them, also rather clear, I think. The first 7 verses, the psalmist giving thanksgiving, the joy that he has in having been delivered and having this victory. That bit of an imprecatory thought, 8 through 12, God's enemies are going to continue to be defeated, destroyed, and then closing out, as is typical for many psalms, with this doxology in verse 13, this formulaic statement of praise. So that is Psalm 21. Next up will be Psalm 22, which is considerably longer, and as I noted in passing earlier, one of the most of all the Messianic Psalms that you find in the book of Psalms. So, Lord willing, we will pick back up with that one next time. Thank you very much for your kind attention today.
Over all the earth you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you'd reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams, in my darkest hour. You are the Lord of all I am, so won't you reign in me again. Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord, 'cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again, Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams, in my darkest hour. You are the Lord of all I am, so won't you reign in me again, Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams, in my darkest hour. You are the Lord of all I am, so won't you reign in me again. You are the Lord of all I am, so won't you reign in me